What's going on, guys? Drupaduski here. Today we are going to do the quick and dirty guide for the support monk. I'm not going to say it's for specifically season 10 because it's still viable right now and it's been used for multiple seasons in the past. As most of you know at this point, the monk is the only real healing class for the 4-man meta, and it doesn't look as though that's going to change for season 10. So this will be viable in season 10, and it's still viable right now. So what I'm going to do is go over the gear and also answer some of the questions that a lot of people have. What I've noticed in stream is that the majority of questions I get during the night are about the support monk. So I think that there's just not enough out there in regards to why people do what they do on this build, and what variations you can run when you're running either a speed farm or a push build. So let's jump into the gear. So with my setup, and for the majority of setups, I'm thinking now that I've got my gear set up the way that it is, you can almost always run the 2-piece Uliana set. You always have a three pieces of Inna, but there is a variation where you don't run 2-piece Uliana. You wear Innas and then Leoric's Crown. I don't think that that's really necessary until very, very late game. And I'm saying, like, last night we did a 102 with the setup that I have right now, and we didn't have any issues with survivability. The reason that I want to state that using Uliana's two-piece set is so valuable to the group in the current damage meta that we have is that even if you don't have Exploding Palm on your bar, like as you can see, I don't have EP here, but I am wearing 2-piece Ulianas. The default Uliana skill, the default EP skill is cause an enemy to bleed for 1200% weapon damage as physical over 9 seconds. So by default, when wearing the 2-piece Uliana set, every third hit of your spirit generator applies Exploding Palm. Now, even without it on its bar, it's going to apply that to the mobs in the party. And based on the current damage meta that we have set up right now, the Witch Doctor is always wearing a Pain Enhancer. Now, Pain Enhancer grants 3% increased attack speed for each bleeding enemy within 20 yards. So in that moment where the Witch Doctor is setting up and he's casting Haunt, his Haunts are going to cast faster, but the moment that he starts to spin as the fire rotation comes around on his Convention of Elements, he's already got that attack speed bonus from all the enemies that you have bleeding around you. So it really benefits the Witch Doctor. It takes a lot less to ramp up for the Witch Doctor to do tons and tons of damage to the mobs that you have piled up for that current point in the grift that you've stopped and decided, like, okay, this is a pull. We're gonna clear this tile. So I always use 2-piece Ulianas. The variation here is that if you're pushing and you notice that your group, you cannot keep your Witch Doctor alive and you're dying as the support monk. I don't include the Gen Monk in that because Gen Monks die. I mean, there are different variations and ways to play that build to where, like in hardcore, the Gen Monk will just jump out of the grift right away and sit in town until the boss spawns. But in softcore pushing, the Gen Monk typically dies pretty regularly. Ours dies all the time. Some die less, but they prioritize a little bit more survivability than ours does, where ours is set up strictly for damage for the Rift Guardian. So if you're noticing that your Witch Doctor and yourself are having trouble surviving, then you can take EP off your bar and put Blinding Flash in its place. And enemies that are blinded deal 25... Blinding Flash, Crippling Light. Enemies that are blinded deal 25% reduced damage for 5 seconds after the blind wears off. So that will increase survivability while using 2-piece Ulianas when you're doing something that would be more of a push than a speed farm scenario. So you have 2-piece Ulianas, you have 3-piece Innas here, then we're using Leffies as the shoulders for the Cyclone Strike damage reduction, Strong Arm Bracers, because everything that suffers from a knockback, you know, from the Cyclone Strike or the barb, the pull barb, they will be getting 29% increased damage on this one, but 30 is the max. I have Oculus Ring for cooldown, or Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac for cooldown reduction, Oculus ring here, and this is a really good Oculus ring. It's 85% attack speed, life per hit, cooldown, and globes. That's all the stats that you want on this ring. For the 85% increased damage, illusory boots to allow you to freely move through mobs, and then Little Rogue and Slanderer. Now these are not ideal. You would want max cooldown, life per hit, attack speed on these items, and then an optional secondary bleed there. If you get that secondary bleed, you can do the non-Uliana setup and utilize the Oryx Crown. But as it stands right now, my cooldown reduction is at 64.06, anywhere above 63%, coupled with Gogok of Swiftness and the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. You should have plenty of cooldown to guarantee that Sanctuary will always be up, and also be able to utilize the other abilities on your bar. So I do want to touch on the legendary gems. Now quickly, you will see out there occasionally, and I've done this myself, I get yelled at in stream about it sometimes, you utilizing Esoteric instead of Efficacious Toxin here, because you'll say, oh, well, my Barbarian has Efficacious Toxin. Efficacious Toxin stacks. So it is not a multiplicative stack, it is an additive stack. So it's not a huge damage increase, but it is a damage increase. And being a support character, there are two main functions: to increase the damage of your damage dealers and to keep your damage dealers alive. So if you have the correct amount of cooldown and the correct stats rolled on your gear, you'll know how strong you are based on the level of grift you've pushed and your ability to survive and keep your Witch Doctor alive as much as possible. So if you can't do that without utilizing esoteric alteration, then you need to work on modifying your gear and modifying your setup so that you can get rid of using this gem and use Efficacious Toxin, Ice Blink level to 25, which gives that 10% increased damage or 10% increased chance to be critically hit, and then you need Gogok of Swiftness, which gives you toughness and also gives you cooldown reduction for stacks. So it's 15% pretty much all the time. It's pretty much all the time up. So let me just touch on the skills here quickly. We use Crippling Wave Tsunami. This freezes enemies. Mantra of Salvation, Agility. Now, any of you guys that play solo monk that use a mantra, as many of you know at this point, you never activate mantra when you're pushing solo. You're only using it for the passive, right? Because especially if you're on like YOLO Gen Monk, you don't want to utilize spirit for anything other than necessity. So Cyclone Strike, essentially. But in support circumstances, you're going to be spinning and watching that cooldown and just always keeping it up, because it just always helps with survivability. Then we have in this current setup, Blinding Flash, Crippling Light, and as I said before, enemies that are blinded deal 25% reduced damage. This helps when you're having difficulty keeping the group alive. Maybe you're pushing a little bit beyond your limits. The alternative variation here when using the two-piece Uliana is to have Exploding Palm. Flesh is weak. What that does is enemies take 15% additional damage for 9 seconds, so it's a huge damage increase for your Witch Doctor as you're going through the Greater Rift before you get to the Rift Guardian. Now, it's also a damage increase on the Rift Guardian too, because you'll have EP above him, but this is highly useful for getting through the Grift faster if you can keep people alive. Then Inner Sanctuary, I like to use Temple of Protection, because currently, the support barb's role is to apply. I'm brain farting here, but the damage reduction passive, the Barbarian damage reduction passive, and then Scout, right? And so in a lot of maps, especially in the current meta, you have your Barbarian having to scout like far into, a barrack or far into a cave, and they don't have the ability to get back 100% of the time to apply Ignore Pain. Sorry about that. Which which keeps the Witch Doctor and yourself, safe from control impairing effects. So with this Sanctuary, I like to use this. We use this in 102. This guarantees that the Barb can be more effective at scouting and pulling mobs, and not as concerned with getting IP up. Yes, IP is super, super important for survivability, but if you have enough globes and other things on your gear, and I will go over those passives quickly in a moment, or the roll stat priority in a moment, then you can get away with a few seconds here and there with not having Ignore Pain up, but then your Witch Doctor is not getting knocked out of the group from knockback, or pulled away from Sanctuary by a blue mob that has Vortex or something like that. So it's very useful. You can also use Safe Haven. You can tweak this. This is just the setup that we like to run. It's very useful and lets the Barb get a little more leeway, because support Barb is by far the hardest role in groups. Most people out there think that it's easy. If you've never done it, it is very hard to be efficient at pulling, keeping IP up, and also scouting and letting the group know where they need to go. So we also have Cyclone Implosion. That goes without saying. I do want to cover something quickly that is very useful information. Now, Diminishing Returns. Diminishing Returns was something that was implemented either or a few seasons ago, where mobs are now, immune to CC or pull after they've been pulled twice for a few seconds, right? There's an internal cooldown there on pulls. So with Diminishing Returns so say for instance you Cyclone Strike and you're just spamming Cyclone Strike in the Grift. That's going to proc Diminishing Returns on the mobs around you. Then when your Barb starts throwing his spears out, they're not going to pull, because they are immune to pull for X amount of seconds before they can then be pulled. So when you're running the EP version of this, and a lot of times people that are playing support monk will say, and I've been guilty of this myself, is I have to Cyclone Strike because I can't reset my cooldowns on Sanctuary using the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. When you have EP on your bar, you can. So you don't create the Diminishing Returns problem. So as you're spinning, you can just keep hitting EP, and that will proc your Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac to allow you to relay Sanctuary, but also not pull mobs that are, maybe just a hair outside of your range or not far enough, or they didn't pull all the way in, but now your Barb can't pull them at all because they're, So every once in a while you can just hit EP a few times, and that will help you get your cooldown back up without Cyclone Striking and making it more difficult on the Barb to effectively create the group that you want to set up. So that's just something to keep in mind when you have EP on the Barb for the increased damage for your group. Your passives here, I have Seize the Initiative, Beacon of Etar for cooldowns, Resolve, Near-Death Experience, of course, because you are very, very vulnerable in those first few seconds of the Grift, and also in like long stretches of caves where you've got, sprinkled archers and other things like that you're running through, and you just like proc instantly. You're not tanky when you're not attacking, when you're not set up on this build. So it's great. You have to have Near-Death Experience. And then I have Sixth Sense as my passive here. Now the alternative variation to Hellfire Amulet is to take, for this season, I think there's the most viable thing here is going to be a star. Because of Blazing Guardians. Blazing Guardians are hell on earth for everyone, as many of you guys have seen if you're going through this season, and I don't think that's going to change next season. If I didn't go star, I would definitely go electricity immunity. So let's go over the role prioritization on shoulders. On anywhere you can get it, you want cooldown reduction, right? On shoulders, rings, chest, amulet, you want globes, right? You really want health globes and potions grant plus blah to life. You want to get globes wherever you can, but you really want cooldown reduction. So if there is an item that you can't get globes and cooldown reduction, you're undoubtedly going to replace that item for one that you can. But unless your cooldown is high enough to not utilize the Oryx Crown and go up with this setup, which is just better for the groups, I would say take the cooldown. Because if you're at that point, then you're still gearing actively, and you're probably going to replace that item pretty quickly. some of this gear that you see that I have on isn't the best stuff that I've gotten, and typically you can get away with being a little lenient as long as you've got the things that you want. Where you can get it, there are a few pieces where you can get it. I would say get the golden health globe pickup. It just helps. It just helps a little. I mean, it's not a ton, but it helps. That extra 4 yards you can get off of your gear does help. So if you can get away with keeping it, get it. If not, don't worry about it, right? I've got globes on my chest, you know, as I said on, there's, so attack speed, life per hit, cooldown, globes, 85%. This is a great Oculus ring. This is the kind of Oculus ring you would target. All I would want here is 8% instead of 6% on cooldown. Your Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, attack speed, cooldown, globes, I can roll that resource cost to something else. This is hasn't been rolled yet. Illusionary boots for getting through mobs, and then Little Rogue and Slanderer. You're going to want max cooldown, attack speed, life per hit on these things. And also, if you go a variation where you do not use Juliana's, then you can get bleed, a chance to bleed on hit on these two weapons, and that can benefit that pain enhancer as well. So I know this is supposed to be quick, but I wanted to be as in-depth as possible with the support monk because there's a lot of variations and also a lot of questions regarding this build. I am going to do a support barb video soon and go over that stuff. Please let me know in the comments if there's any questions you have on this, if there's any, you know, changes that you think that maybe I should make to the setup or to the description that I'm giving you guys. I really want to, you know, open up the conversation about support classes because I think they're fairly neglected. They have been nerfed in the past so that we have a 2 support rather than a 3 support meta, but right now, I mean, our only viable healer in the game is this monk, and there's almost always going to be a pull barb in the group. So these 2 classes are very, very important for competitive play in Diablo 3, and they need more love and they need to be understood more by everyone in the community that does play these classes. So if you have any insight that you can provide me or any questions about this guide, please leave a comment below. If you're new to the channel and you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. I am going to be putting out more and more Diablo content. I'm trying to get out a few videos a week. I also stream live on Twitch Monday through Friday. It's at twitch.tv/dropadooski. Feel free to stop by anytime and ask your questions while I'm live or just bullshit with us. Thank you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your week and good luck in the grifts.